Thanks everyone for joining the next episode of the Intersectionality Unfiltered. I'm really excited to be joined with Maryam, a human rights, equalities and community development consultant in Scotland. She's also coordinating the Campaign Against Racism and Education in Scotland, also known as the lovely acronym of CARES. So really excited to be having a conversation with Maryam about some of your work in race equality. I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about your human rights background and also particularly on community development, just from a personal perspective. But also really, really great to have this conversation with you about intersectionality and what it means to you and when you came into contact with it. So do you want to perhaps introduce yourself a little bit beyond what I've kind of mentioned and maybe talk a little bit about your background and anything around intersectionality and what it means to you?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Maryam. I'm Pakistani by origin, born in England, but raised and still live in Scotland at the moment, west of Scotland, I should say. So I think just from that description alone, you can see how I've kind of broken down the identity a little bit. Yeah, I went to school in Scotland and I went to uni and I've worked here as well. My background mainly has been, although I was interested in law, has been volunteering, actually, funnily enough, working with communities, building communities and equality and diversity. And my work is pretty much from the age of 19, my first role was as a volunteer. So everything I've done is from lived experience, from volunteering. It's not actually from a degree or a course. So I have the skills and experience in terms of the work that I've been doing. I've done a lot of work around racism, but I've also specialised in areas around faith equality, and the one that's really close to my heart is disability. So this is where intersectionality came into play for me because I had a lot of friends and family and community members who had additional support need or they had a disability. So when I was 8 years old, one of my best friend's sisters, she was already in a wheelchair, and that was for me an eye-opener to see what her world was like in terms of being not only Pakistani, not only Muslim, but also disabled as well at the same time, and the multiple barriers that she had to face, and some of the cultural stigma from all communities, not just one specific community. So I think I always had an interest. As a young child, I remember I'd always had this thing about injustice. So when I used to see all the sort of news and concerts and things for what was going on in Africa with some of the famines, something like that would really impact me. I wouldn't just be sitting there thinking, oh, that's sad. I'd be like, I want to do something to help that situation because I felt it was so unjust what was going on in the world. So when I was about 13 years old, I'll just share a short experience. My world kind of changed. I was just started high school. I'd been through a tough time at primary school, which I'll touch on later. As I came in the door, remember just finishing the first year of high school, around about April time, 23rd of April, and I heard about Stephen Lawrence. The case just came in, watched the news, young black man stabbed at was racially attacked and killed at a bus stop in London. And I don't know what came over me. I think I had just finished reading Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, and we'd watched the film. So there was this huge thing in me already that, why does this keep happening, especially with the black community? And when I heard that, my heart just broke. And I just thought, I made this commitment that I would do something for Stephen that day. I would always do, in part of all my work, look at how to tackle that injustice wherever we are in the world. So yeah, a lot of the sort of case, the background, what happened afterwards, and the Macpherson report and recommendations form a big basis of my work, actually, even till now. So, and yeah, I've just finished working on the Stephen Lawrence Day 2021 programme, actually, with the Stephen Lawrence Day Foundation. So that was a huge opportunity for me, because never, ever did I think I would be helping, and working alongside the family and everybody involved. I mean, I got to meet Baroness, I got to meet the Imran Khan, the QC. To me, who are like the superheroes of that case, they kept fighting for justice. So to be able to do that, that was a huge achievement for me this year. And I hope I did do them justice as well. But yeah, that's a wee bit about me to start off with.
That's what an incredible story. That Well, one thing I think is it's really great to hear that it's people's experiences that have taken your interest, or that you found that you've connected with on some shape or form. I think just going back to your earlier point around the intersection of faith, disability, and kind of race, I guess, in that respect, with friends and growing up. Did you grow up in Scotland? What does kind of faith equality look like when you were growing up in Scotland
Well,
and that kind of? I'm quite curious.
it's very interesting because obviously, when I came to Scotland, and I was born in Lancashire, so I was
Yeah.
born in Burnley, which has a huge Muslim
Mm.
community, diverse Muslim community as well, Pakistani, Gujarati, and many other ethnic backgrounds as well. So to come to Scotland, the west of Scotland, to a nice suburban town, it was a real change, because what I had not understood when I was growing up was how important the Christian faith is in Scotland, but also what actually happened in terms of the different sects of Christianity. Namely sectarianism that is still in play in Scotland. So I grew up with a sectarianism background more so. I still interacted with my own faith. I'm still a Muslim, but I think for me the culture that I grew up with was, about, was at a Catholic school, was at a Protestant school, and I've actually worked at Celtic and Parkhead as well in the vicinity of those two areas. Being asked if I was a Celtic Muslim, was I a Rangers Muslim, and it was really fascinating to see that dimension added to my experience already as a Pakistani Muslim woman. I think I've got a strong sort of experience of experiencing what happened in terms of that. But as a Muslim, I think it's been it was a very new experience. And back in the 1980s, there was nobody that was visibly trying to look different. There was a Muslim community, but we were all quite in our own wee pockets and silos, unless we lived in sort of largely populated Muslim areas. There was no mosques, there was no halal meat shops. It was far and few between in the centre of Glasgow, I would say, in certain areas. So it was hard to access faith services. But as time has grown on, 30 years being in the same town, I can see a huge increase, diversity, centres opening up. Still don't have all the facilities that we need, but we do have that infrastructure, for the Muslim community. But at the same time, the backdrop with the Christian faith is still there. There is still that division, that is still, and it's interesting to see how that carries on as tradition, to be honest. So I think that has been something in my experience, that I've had my own faith, but then I've also been, raised with another faith as well at the same time.
Yeah, but definitely connect with that in some ways. And growing up in a Hindu family, but going to Church of England school. And I always think of this anecdote of in Hinduism, you start fires as a way of connecting with God, but in Christianity, you don't start fires at all because it's not the right thing to do. So there's
Yeah.
a weird sort of like tension between what one religious narrative was saying to another in some ways. So I can't imagine what that would have been like in Scotland as well, with the added national context and the Glaswegian context, and thinking about the lack of facilities to support the Islamic community.
I mean, my primary experience was as a Muslim girl, but at school I still had to follow the Christian faith, and actually it's quite interesting because I had to do the daily prayer. I had to do we were forced to sit there and do the hymn singing every week. We went to a church service, and I think it was about primary 5 when I turned around, and I was the first child to do that at my school. I turned around and says, "Why am I going to church? Because I'm not a Christian." And they all quickly got, "Oh, the child has spoken up. Why is she saying this?" I was like, "I'm not going because I'm not Christian. I'm sorry, but I'm not going. I'll take the day off." And that was the first time there was an opt-out at our school. So there is the legal provision of the opt-out. So and to this day now, that option is still there. I know my children have accessed it as well. But I just recognised that because it was very engulfing for me, that trying to be Muslim but still having to practice the Christian rituals was very difficult. So I think when I spoke up, that kind of gave me a bit of confidence to start finding my own identity, because I think when I first started school, I was so busy trying to fit in. And I had a very difficult experience because I was the first Asian girl, the first girl of colour at my school. So I was the social experiment. To see the whole, oh, why do you have a moustache? Why do you have X's here? Why are you that colour? Are you the same as us? Prove that you're the same as us. It was very difficult. It was a very isolating experience. You know, people would sometimes want to be my friends, then they wouldn't. And then I would hear them making fun of my house, like, oh, it smells like curry, they're weird, they wear funny clothes. So I kind of lived through all of that from the ages of 5 till 12, you know. And part of my identity was very confused because I think I went through a process of trying to be white to fit in. Because when you're the only one, you do anything to fit in. The funny thing was I had 5 siblings after me, so I think I kind of paved the way a little bit. Their experience was a wee bit easier. So I think, yeah, from a faith and cultural, ethnic minority cultural experience, it was very difficult growing up.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I appreciate sharing those moments in even back to childhood and when we're younger can be quite triggering in a lot of ways. So thank you so much for sharing that so honestly. So I guess I do want to hear more about your kind of full circle moment with the Stephen Lyons Foundation, but I just want to kind of unpack a little bit. So at what point in your kind of career or kind of personal life even did you come into contact with this notion of intersectionality, I suppose, and
Yeah.
did that help you make sense of some of these experiences from your history and things like that?
Definitely, because I obviously came into, I think you live with intersectionality when you're living in a different country from that is not of your ethnic origin. That's a default setting that I didn't realise at the time. So I think I went through all this identity crisis as a woman, as a person of faith, all the different aspects, my mental health, all these things. It was when I was doing a piece of work back in 2009. It was part of the local authority in Glasgow. They'd set up a community planning partnership and they'd set up what they called an Equalities Hub to basically be the Equalities partnership that would oversee community engagement processes. And that's one of the things that I specialise in that public services trying to meet their public sector equality duties. So that's what that hub did. What they did was they employed one worker that looked at BAME communities, one worker that looked at LGBT communities, and this is 2009 before the Equality Act had actually even come in. One worker that looked at disabilities and one worker that looked at women's rights. So having that kind of setting where you're bringing these strands together, these workers together, and overseen by this voluntary sector partnership that represent those strands of women, race, and disability and LGBT was probably the first time I realised what intersectionality was. Because when you brought those strands together, it was very clear that you couldn't categorise and define one into one. They all crossed over. And all our experiences were very, different as well. And even, for a person of colour, from an LGBT background, it made me question actually, from the white LGBT experience, does that encompass their needs? And actually, I realised it didn't, because the experience I had showed me that if this is what I was experiencing as a heterosexual, I don't know how it would be for someone from that background in that community. Likewise, in the other intersectional things that I was experiencing. So that was my first time that I actually came across the term that I was putting in an actual working example of, working across strands. And that then helped me change the focus of my work. Because up until then, it was very like, this is race, this is disability, this is religion. And even at that point, the Scottish Government funding used to be the race religion funding. And I used to think, but actually, you can't categorise all of them. One thing that I did learn from that hub that was really, really helpful, which is something then that impacted me personally and professionally, was the human rights-based approaches. Because I just felt, when I was a little girl, and I felt that when I seen those adverts around what was going on in Ethiopia, that wasn't about equalities, that was about human rights actually. And every individual is a human, and they're not all the same. Not every Muslim is the same, not every Indian person's the same, not everyone from the LGBT community is the same, but actually all very individual. And I think what's important is to realise is actually having a human rights-based approach in a day-to-day scenario or in your work, is so important, because sometimes asking a simple question, a common sense question, could save a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of pain for a lot of people. You know, do you want to come on our work night out? Is it okay if we go to the pub? For some people, they'll say no. For some people, they'll say yes. But to do roundabout EDI training and trying to impact assess, you know, I think the human rights based approach has helped. And I've the one that I tend to use is the FRIDA. I think it's because of the name FRIDA. It's fairness, respect, equality, dignity, autonomy. That resonates more with me. So very quickly, I used that as part of my parental engagement at my children's school, which actually incidentally was my old primary school. So I went back there thinking, well, I was asked actually by the local authority to make the change, because I had said I don't want to put my kids here, can I try another school? They go, no, we need your insight to make the change. So I tried, and we set up a FRIDA parents group, because I wasn't going to categorise them. It was anyone who didn't fit in, anyone who didn't have the Land Rover, the dog, the 2 children, the perfect house, you know, all the IKEA furniture. Anyone who didn't fit in that stereotype could be part of the FRIDA group, you know, and it worked. It worked for a while, until obviously the culture of the school, the Stepford wife stepped in and they made sure that the group disappeared. And that showed me that even there's always going to be a resistance to change. But it was a good start, because we did start making changes. We went in, we did international days, workshops around different faith festivals. It was when the questions came about the LGBT curriculum and the need for a church service when the school was 50% non-Christian, that things kind of changed. But I think it was a good experience. There was a lot of learning from it as well.
Can I just ask as well, in terms of the LGBT curriculum, because that's been quite a sensitive area in schools, what's the current context is it in Glasgow you're based, is that right?
Yeah, I'm just outside, south of Glasgow. So it is being filtered in to the through the relationship, the relationship health and the relationship sexual health program. I think that's what it's called. So it's part of the curriculum at the moment through that. It came about because we tried to ask, and there was lots of different, you know, views on it. Like it's for high school, it's not for primary school. The only time they turned to it though is when they needed the unisex toilets, because they wanted to upgrade the toilets. So at that point, then they could use the LGBT excuse, which I found horrifying, because I felt you're not doing anything, you're not creating any awareness in the school community, but you'll take the toilets on for that reason, you know, and justify the unisex toilets for that. So yeah, I don't let anything pass, Aaron. I do hold things to account, you know, across all the Equality Act sort of characteristics. I think it's important. And I think there's a lot of learning still needed in Scotland around what their understanding is of how does the public sector equality duty actually relate to a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, a head teacher, a fireman, a police officer, because it does. But a lot of them think they're above it, or they don't need to, you know, and they have a duty.
I was going to ask as well, thanks for that. Just in terms of, some people can kind of get confused between human rights approaches and social justice, and some people say they're the same thing. So I just wondered if you'd had any thoughts on, you know, where the overlap is, or where there is quite a big line between the two. Because I hear some, in a lot of contexts, when we're talking about equalities work or equity work more broadly, we'll often switch between social justice and human rights, or rights-based approaches in that way. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what are the nuances between the two, if there are any.
I think, to be honest, I mean, a lot of the social justice campaigns are obviously, they're driven by time and trend. And I hate to say it, it's always a trend, it's a hashtag at the moment. And that's the problem. There's no consistency, there's no commitment to keep it going. There's always there'll be a fizzle out period of it. So Black Lives Matter, you know, Me Too, where are they now? If we look at them, we assess it now in society, in workplaces, in academia, where are they sitting right now? The thing with the human rights-based approach is at least it gives you a framework, you know, within your institution, within your workplace. It gives you indicators you can measure against, just like the public sector equality duty does to a certain extent. Obviously, that's imposed by law, but the human rights-based approach is optional. But it's definitely something that starts from your mission statement, practice, to different indicators that at least it's embedded in practice and there's plans and things as well. So yeah, I think there's a huge difference, and then after that, I think social justice campaigns are great. They influence change. They're needed at society level. I just feel the practicality of them they're time limited, and they're always based on trends as well.
No, it's really, really helpful. And yeah, I'd agree with that. That makes a lot of sense in terms of thinking about these kind of campaigns or these movements that peak for a certain amount of time, but they do kind of fizzle out. And we definitely see that happening quite often. And I think we see a lot of conversation around how do we sustain that dialogue? How do we keep it going beyond the peak? So that's the thing. It's just a really fair point. Speaking of campaigns and kind of movements and sustaining the dialogue, I wanted to ask a little bit about this, your work with the Stephen Lawrence Foundation, but also, that moment when you found out about the Stephen Lawrence case and the trial and so on and so forth. And that's been one moment in time, particularly in British history, that has really changed a lot of things. And it's always referred back to as a significant turning point in race equality, and probably more broadly than that. So I'm oversimplifying it for sure. How was that from going to see it on TV when you came back from school through to actually working with the family? And yeah, what was that like? It'd be great to hear more about and the work you did with them.
It was so surreal that it's still unbelievable to this day that at one point, I was sitting having meetings and discussions with the Lawrences themselves, with Imran Khan, the QC himself as well. And it was just that whole process of growing up with Doreen, growing up with Neville, Stuart, and Imran on the TV, watching the case, watching the newspaper articles, all the updates, what happened with the double jeopardy law, seeing the two guys obviously get prosecuted as well when the evidence came with Clive Driscoll. And see, I have all the books at home. So it was only 2 years ago. I remember putting all of them out on my bed and taking an Instagram picture and thinking, oh, this is the best I'm going to get. This is the closest I'm going to get. But at least I'm sitting here and I've got it all in front of me, and it's something I can pass on to the kids. And one thing I did do was 2 years ago, actually, I was visiting London and it was my birthday, and the kid said to me, oh, what do you want to do for your birthday, Mum? It's your birthday today. It's my son's 2 days after. And I was like, okay, we've booked Kuwait, but I said, there's somewhere I really need to go. And I said, I'll explain to you when I get there. And it was Eltham. I had to go to the plaque. I had to give my condolences. I had to just go and see it where it happened. And then I explained to the kids in the most simplistic ways that something happened here, but something happened that then instigated a change that to this day still oversees your rights, as minority ethnic children, as children of colour. And I explained to them, like, in the most simplest terms, this is what happened to Stephen, and this is why it happened, and then what his mum did, what his brother did, what his dad did as well. I did the changes that came about to the law, and now today, this is why they do this in school and other places. So fast forward 2 years later, and this is the power of maybe COVID and lockdown, social media, being online. I managed to get in touch, and the opportunity did avail. And I just can't thank them enough. It was an amazing time, an amazing opportunity to work with them and to be given that opportunity to do something for Stephen and on a national level online. So it was huge to see them in person, to see them online in person, and to see the people, the humans that they were actually, and everything that they do, and everything they fought for, to see that in reality was just truly immense, to be honest. And it was quite emotional, because obviously Sarah McPherson died this year in February as well. And that was another thing that I was always going to try and do, is see if I could go and try and visit. And he's obviously from Scotland. He's got a client up here, so it was just like the whole thing coming together was just really surreal, and it's made me learn and grow as a person. That it's been long for them. They've got a lot of patience, and there's still full justice hasn't been done. But the fact that a mother said no, and she kept asking questions, and she wasn't going out in marches, she wasn't campaigning, she wasn't wearing the t-shirts and doing the banners. She did it a different way. She just did it quietly with dignity, but she just kept asking those questions with the lawyers. And obviously the investigations happened, and to see how that has grown till now, that there's a National Day for Stephen Lawrence Day now on the 22nd of April every year. It's just unreal for me, to be honest, to actually see them in person and to see her and to see her legacy was just fantastic.
And my understanding is when Stephen Lawrence was murdered, there was a huge movement behind it. But it's still, to this day, still has stuck as a moment in time. What do you think has been kind of the thing that's made it not just a trend, but turned into a significant human rights issue?
Sorry, Aaron, my microphone was muted there. I think it's been the fact that the case has never left the media. It's always been in the media. And I think the fact that it's always had coverage has helped. They've always had a lot of support from the public, I think. It's a case that rocked the nation's heart, to be honest. It will always be at the nation's heart. It rocked our conscience that why did this happen and why was this allowed to even happen? So I think, and it's something that passes on through generations because it still resonates with lots of young people. I remember speaking to quite a lot of youth within the work that I was doing, and that's still the case today for a lot of Black youth, that they still get profiled, they still get stopped and searched by the police, but there's still looks, by a lot of people when they're out in public, and there's a level of uncertainty and not feeling safe. I think the case will always have this overarching legacy for the Black youth, to be honest, and because it also promotes the recommendations that were then came out about institutional racism, in the public sector equality duty and all these things that, with the promotion of equal opportunity. I think because it's embedded in law, the case will always be in workplaces, will always have, I think children will always look for our George Floyd moment, and this was it. Because of BLM last year and children being online and the hashtags and everything, a lot of young people and children became quite aware of what happened to George, and then it made people research. And when you look at the UK, it is one of the most high-profile cases still to this day that hasn't got full justice. And I think for them, I think it will always be in our history, and it will always, it will always be part of our legacy. But I think young people, it's one case and one family that young people always look up to, because when young people go through difficulties, racism and bullying or whatever, they always look for history for those figures that stood up, those civil rights activists. And, we think of Martin Luther King, we think of many other people, Malcolm X. But in the UK today, it's Doreen Lawrence, let's be frank, and I think she's an icon, for what she's done. And I'm not saying, she's an icon in a way of social change, of, rights, human rights, and standing up against racism, and for her, she still has a lot of that. This is not because of something that happened that, it was something that was, so horrifying that happened to her family, but it's the fact how she dealt with it, I think, that really defines her, and there's a saying of hers that she could have sat and, stayed away, but that's just not her. She could have sat down and not bothered, but that's just not her. And I think for any mother out there, and I think that's the part that really hit, that's why the case really impacts us, is because it was a mother's fight for justice, and any mum who knows when their child has come home and someone's hit them or is not talking to them or has fallen down, it's that love of that mum, to be honest, or that parent, that Doreen, I think all of us can resonate with.
It's so insightful, and it's important that we don't forget that point, that moment in history, and the legacy that's come from it as well, and the enormous impact it's had on society, culture, legislation, I believe, as well, on policy, which has been really incredible. Yeah. I guess these things have stimulated and kind of drawn you to equalities work in some shape or form. And I just wonder, how is that connected to these things that you've seen, witnessed, experienced yourself in different ways and forms? What was the translation of that? What was that? Are these the kind of key drivers for you into this human rights work and doing these human rights consultancy and things like that? I just wonder, what does that continue to drive you now, like hearing those stories, or what else is there?
I think my own experience as a child going through school, that was always something that was going to dominate what was going to happen going forward. I think also it's the human rights, the commitment to human rights from a young age. I think always wanting to help others. That's just a big part of my personality. But I think when I joined the voluntary sector, the charity sector, that is what we do. We help others and we help communities. And I think although I was pursuing a law degree, it never felt natural to me. I think being with communities, being at grassroots, knowing the real issues, the real causes, I think that for me has been a driver and always will be a driver. There's always going to be many things. I mean, the Lawrence's story was definitely by far probably the most significant. But then what happens in Palestine, that impacts me quite a lot. I've done a lot in terms of what would be going on in Palestine and trying to understand that at a local level as well, what that means for our communities and how we live together here. There's also, I think it is just, I think equality and diversity, what really drives me is it's the lived experience, because you have a lot of people claiming that they know equality and diversity and they're doing programs of change and it's all wonderful stuff, but what's the impact of it all and where's the change, you know? So I definitely think, yeah, the Lawrences, but I think my faith is a big part of this as well, that, you know, at the end of the day there's a saying that treat others the way you want to be treated, to be honest. You know, it's aspirational, but if we could all do that, that might help start building bridges.
Yes, it's quite a simple principle that we often forget, or the society often forgets. I guess just thinking about kind of like my last question of this conversation is, intersectionality is a word that gets thrown around quite a lot in different forums, even in the charity sector. I used to work in the third sector as well, so I'm fully aware of buzzwords flying around in different places. I just wondered what your thoughts are on the issues of integrating or using intersectionality. What are the kind of things that we might need to be mindful or cognizant of, or some of the pitfalls of it as well, I guess, if there are any?
I think with intersectionality, it's important to understand that there are multiple dimensions to every person. We're not all one category. There's not one box we can, you know, on the monitoring forms that we can all tick, you know, and we're all very diverse. You know, that's just the way we are as humans. I don't think anyone has got the same exact genes or same exact personality. But I think the only pitfalls of intersectionalities is when you get hung up on the boxes, you know, when you keep breaking down and I think at one point, because of the work that I did around equalities, I would always go in and looking at all the intersectionality of all the boxes, you know, and I try to assume that for myself as well in personal experiences as well as professional experiences. So I think that's the only downside, is you can sometimes become too engrossed with the detail. You know, when you go in and you look, I mean, I would look at that and think, you know, for my son, like, he's Pakistani, he's Muslim, he's autistic, he's a boy. You know, you can't sometimes go through life with that lens, because then you'll never switch off. But I think in terms of, you know, I have many thoughts about multiculturalism, integration, because I think the difficulty here is in the UK is that we assume that assimilation is the way to integrate, is to become part of society. And it's something we do globally. It's not just the UK. Let's be fair, other countries do it as well. They expect you to start practicing and doing the same, you know, to a certain extent. But I think assimilation was what the Great Empire did. You know, and my granddad, when he left India, it was India. There was no Pakistan and Bangladesh. When he came back, it was Pakistan and Bangladesh, and he lost all his neighbours, all his friends that he knew that were Sikh and Hindu, because we lived in a very harmonious community. But when they divided it up, you know, and they wanted us all to be in a certain way. I mean, even today in Pakistan, you know, people still have tea set at 4 p.m. and go out for an afternoon walk, and they still play badminton on their lawns. You know, that's not something that community, that country, you know, historically did before, until the empire came in. And that's my issue with assimilation. I think integration is not assimilation. It's not working. Because see all the English language classes, the whole, you know, you need to come and integrate and be the same as us and have the Union Jack flags. That's only created more division and ghettoism. And so I'm from Lancashire. I'm from the Burnley Blackburn community. That community is completely now, it's not assimilating. It's just created its own wee community there, you know. And they say the terms are in Bradistan. I understand what's going on there. They have created their own communities in Bradford, you know, and they're self-sufficient to a certain extent. I think we have to really go back and revisit integration, what it really actually means. And I think multiculturalism, to give its due, it's like what I used to do in the school. I'd do the whole international sort of Mela sort of activity where everybody come with their flags, their food, their dress. It's great celebrating international cultures. I think we did need to recognise it, but it's a step. It's your first step of getting to know somebody. It's not the only way. That's not going to fix this whole issue around integration and building community relations. And that's something, again, the Equality Act, that's always been, you know, a third part of the duty is building relations between the host community, or, you know, people with, you know, who are not seen as having these characteristics, and people who do have those characteristics. So I think there's something that I always believe, that if I'm a minority ethnic person living here, I know my rights, I know my duties, but I also need to know my responsibilities. And that part about building community relations is a two-way process. And we as communities and individuals somehow need to be a bit more confident in celebrating our identities and sharing that with others as well. Not to the point where, you know, people are feeling uncomfortable, but introducing it and saying, look, this is who I am, and we kind of need to meet a happy medium, you know, to live side by side. So I think that's where multiculturalism was a wee bit short-sighted, that there was no planning for it after. It was just multiculturalism, and that was it, you know, multicultural Britain. And Britain's great with words and labels, but I think in terms of, you know, actually looking at impacts and creating plans, that's where we need to do a wee bit more work.
Thanks so much for that. I feel like that was possibly your final, I was going to ask for your final thoughts, but it feels like that was a really strong take-home message as well. And I think you're right, we do get caught up in British culture perfecting words and forgetting about what we're trying to achieve and get towards. And I think there's the conversations around using the BME label, and actually how much more time do we need to talk about the label when we just start doing the work? So yeah, it's a disguise in that respect. But thank you very much for your conversation today and for your time. It's really appreciated. And yeah, thanks very much for joining.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say before I go, every day is a new day, so you can always just keep on learning something new as well. So thank you again for the opportunity. It was lovely chatting to you.